Hello, I'm Nolan, this is Veronica. We're back for our third video on Judges. Today we're going to be going over Judges 8. At the end of this, I want to go back and read our character comparison from the book in the first video. So last time, what had happened is God had showed Gideon miraculously that he was going to be able to overtake the Amalekites, and he charged through and was chasing down some of their rulers. He had called out some of the Ephraimites, and they had taken and captured Oreb and Zeb and killed them at the winepress and at the rock, which kind of symbolized where the Israelites were hiding at first, was in their wine presses and in the rocks. So we're going to pick it up in chapter 8. It says, "Now the Ephraimites asked Gideon, 'Why have you treated us like this? Why didn't you call us when you went to fight Midian?' And they challenged him vigorously. But he answered them, 'What have I accomplished compared to you? Aren't the gleanings of Ephraim's grapes better than the full grape harvest of Abiezer? God gave Oreb and Zeb, the Midianite leaders, into your hands. What was I able to do compared to you?' At this, the resentment against him subsided." We have another guest.
That was
Mr. Gizmo. Mr. Gizmo.
That is different.
Yep, you gotta go though, bud. Thinks he can jump up on tables now. Okay. So anyway, this whole point of the chapter is there was some beef with the Ephraimites and Manasseh. What is this?
He never does this.
What is this? All right, he jumps up again. He's just in the video. So, all right. So there was some beef between the Ephraimites and Manasseh. Gideon was part of Manasseh. They had gotten a switch blessing from Joseph, their ancestor. And when Gideon originally called out, if you go back to chapter 6, he didn't call out the Ephraimites, and that's because there's this ongoing beef where the Ephraimites were the leaders. They got the bigger blessing. They had kind of a pride swelled up where they thought they were better maybe, or they thought they should have been involved. And that showed when they came up to him like, "Hey dude, we're the big dogs here. Why didn't you call us out? Why didn't you bring us some of this victory? I mean, you did us dirty." And you can definitely hear the pride in their voice. The answer he gave, in that character study, it did say that he was being diplomatic, which to an extent, yes. When he answered, "What have I accomplished compared to you? Aren't the gleanings of Ephraim's grapes better than the full grape harvest of Abiezer?" I don't think he meant that at all. I think he was just saying it to appease them, maybe even,
Howard, maybe?
yeah, kind of being a little bit sarcastic, and but it pleased them, and sometimes that is with prideful people. Sometimes you can say something to a prideful person that's meant to be like something to maybe call them out, or like, "Hey dude, this is what you're doing," and you say it and they're like, yeah, and they think it's a compliment. I've heard things simply like, say you have someone who stepped up to a supervisor role, and something happened, like, "Man, you guys are lucky I'm here. Like, nobody would know how to do that without me being here." And you say something like, "Well, yeah, man, I mean, what could we have done without you?" He's like, yeah, what could you have done without me? Not realizing that you're trying, not being sarcastic, you're kind of being like, "Hey, dude, like, we get it, all right?" So that's something kind of small. It's just kind of an attitude it starts out with. And I want to mention this too, the last time God talked to him is when he told him to go down and attack them, and then gave him the sign. From this chapter on, you're going to see a whole shift in Gideon's character, and you're never going to hear from God again in these chapters. Like, God's not going to talk to Gideon again. What's kind of sad here is, like, the first chapter, Gideon was a coward, and he might not have said something like that to the Ephraimites. He might not have been able to say something like, "Oh man, I'm so sorry we didn't call you out. You guys are so great." That's the way I kind of interpret it. I don't really see it as like diplomatic. I see half of them swollen up with pride, the other half kind of being like, "Whatever, dude," and them just being like, "Yeah, you're right. We are good. We are better. We did do these things." So you just see a huge shift in Gideon's character. This isn't the same coward from chapter 1. I feel, not chapter 1, but chapter 6. When we're introduced, he has all these weaknesses and sins, and God is helping him with doubt, with fear, giving him bravery and all this kind of stuff, and he starts to get kind of prideful in the last chapter for the Lord and for Gideon, and then it kind of picks up here right to this instant argument right after that. Any thoughts on that?
No, that's true. Like, I think a lot of pride, almost.
Yep. Oh, definitely a lot of pride. Yeah. So the next the next verse is Gideon and his 300 men, exhausted yet keeping up the pursuit, came to the Jordan and crossed it. He said to the men of Succoth, which I think I said that right, give my troops some bread. They are worn out. I am still pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. Oh. But the officials of Succoth said, do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession? Why should we give you bread to your troops? So they respond like, whoa, dude, you're acting like you already have these guys. Why should we give you bread? And people think, well, that was rude. Yeah, it was, but you got to think is everyone had seen the size of the Amalekites combined with all the other eastern people. It was so big that it covered the ground like sand, and you couldn't even count anything. These people are definitely scared. They're like, you know what? If we help this guy, then and he doesn't succeed, they're gonna come back and they're gonna kill us for helping them. So by giving them bread, they would have been risking their own well-being too. Which, if you go back to when Gideon first started, he was threshing wheat in the winepress because he was scared. So these guys are experiencing fear just like Gideon had experienced fear in the first chapter, and his fear caused him to doubt and doubt and doubt God. This fear caused them not to want to help him because they were afraid that the Amalekites would come back and hurt them. Then Gideon replied, just for that, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hands, I will tear your flesh with desert thorns and briars. So his response is interesting to me because God was very generous with him. He was gentle. He was caring. He showed him miracles. Go ahead.
No, I was saying even through his needing the extra signs.
Yes, sign after sign after sign.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. She's not feeling well today. I just got over being sick, so if my voice sounds kind of funny and she seems a little out of breath, that's probably what's going on. So what Veronica was saying and is interesting too. Is like God gave him sign after sign after sign and was patient with him when he was scared. Gideon had the opportunity to share that quality back to the people. And this is going to be a judge. Gideon's a judge. He's going to be someone who's going to lead Israel. Imagine your leader having that quality, being able to show mercy, being able to show kindness in the midst of those things. But this is his first rule as he's moving in this leadership position. He's threatening them because of their fear, the same kind of fear that he had as well. So from there he went up to Peniel and made the same request of them, but they answered as the men of Succoth had. So he said to the men of Peniel, when I return in triumph, I will tear down this tower. So again, he asks the next town, who's scared, and then he threatens them. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with a force of about 15,000 men. All that were left of the armies of the eastern peoples, 120,000 swordsmen had fallen. Gideon went up by the route of the nomads east of Nobah and Jogbehah, and attacked the unsuspecting army. Zebah and Zalmunna, the two kings of Midian, fled, but he pursued them and captured them, routing their entire army. Gideon, son of Joash, returned from the battle by the pass of Heres. He caught a young man of Succoth and questioned him. And the young man wrote down for him the names of the 77 officials of Succoth and the elders of the town. So Gideon wins and gets this victory, and he's still stuck on these people disrespecting him and not helping him. He's still tripping out. He goes instantly and captures the man of Succoth and starts getting their names. Like, now I've got these guys. Now I'm going to come back and deal with these guys. So, that's a whole thing right there. It's just, when you focus on revenge to that point, it's going to overtake you and cause you to do some silly things. Forgiveness is usually and always, and not even usually, always the better route. When you start holding on to revenge, it's almost like you chain yourself to something else. You
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just thinking even when it comes not just revenge, but the the whole story that happened a long time ago about the road rage incident. Does that kind of?
Yeah, in Arizona, when we lived out in Arizona, there was an incident on the news, and it was Arizona. They carry firearms, and there was a father that was dealing with road rage. He got out and was having a road rage episode with his small daughter in the car. The vehicle behind him pulled out a firearm. They ended up shooting at each other, and in the process, the man who had the road rage, his daughter passed away. And we talk about that a lot when we're thinking about things because you can get so caught and blinded by this revenge or this instant like I need to do something about this right now that you never know who you're hurting around you. And as we continue to read, you're going to see that Gideon hurt his own family in the long run. But anyway, we'll keep reading. So he caught this young man. Then Gideon came and said to the men of Succoth, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me by saying, 'Do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession?' Why should we give bread to your exhausted men?" He took the elders of the town and taught the men of Succoth a lesson by punishing them with desert thorns and briars. He also pulled down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the town. Then he asked Zebah and Zalmunna, "What kind of men did you kill in Tabor?" So before I go with what he said to them, is he went and did this revenge, and there's no taking that back. You understand? There's men of Israel with them. They're seeing their leader, their judge, exact revenge, and the men of Succoth are their people as well. He's seeing like this is not going to be a leader of grace and mercy. This is going to be a ruthless leader, and there's going to be fear of questioning him, of doubting him, even though when he questioned and doubted God, he got to have that grace and mercy, and God didn't just zap him dead and choose somebody else. God still wanted to use him. So, you know, in the wilderness, when Moses struck the rock, he lost the ability to go into the promised land. The reason that was so intense and such a big punishment was because that was supposed to be a picture. When the people were complaining, he whispered to the rock was going to draw out life-bringing water. It was going to be a picture of God's response to the people. But instead, Moses struck it out of anger and frustration, and God basically told him, "I wasn't frustrated, you were frustrated. And you basically ruined this picture I had for the people." And and as a teacher, and Moses was their teacher, their leader, you bear a huge responsibility for reflecting God to them, just like in the family, in the household. I mean, as a father and one who believes and reads, and it's my job to not only read the word to my kids, but I want to show them that in action. I want to be that in their life. You got anything for that?
No, I think the same. Like I was thinking about even like say like if your spouse is making you upset, I think even giving them that same grace that you've been forgiven, you've been, you know, giving them that same grace and response, even if you're not getting like that beautiful treatment, start by giving it to them. Then in response, they might give it back to you as well. I don't know if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I think leading by example is important. It's important in your marriage. It's important in your parenting. It's important in your walk with your friends. And if you want people to treat you a certain way, you don't just demand that of them, or else, or nobody's gonna want to be around you. Like, yeah, that Nolan guy is cool, but man, the minute you get on his bad side, he just comes at you. It's like nobody wants to be around somebody like that, and it's not a good way you want to be. You're not gonna have a community around you. You're not gonna have, you're not gonna be able to function in a work environment. You're not gonna be able to function in the church. You're not gonna be able to function as a parent if your kids are too scared to come to you because you're gonna beat them up every time they come to you, or just do a verbal onslaught. Then it's gonna cause distance, and you could have a household in which, you have money, you have all kinds of items and things to give to your family, but if you don't have that love, they can grow up with the same traumas as someone who didn't have those things, who's dealing with abuse and things that kind of come with the poverty side of it. We both grew up in ways we didn't have a bunch of everything, but in a way that kind of taught us to be humble and not think so much on the expensive things of life. And sometimes a good life can have the opposite effect too. Sometimes you can have everything, but the most important thing in either situation, whether you have a lot or you have a little, is to have that love and compassion, to have that ability to forgive, and not let this happen. I mean, he murdered these men. There's no taking that back. Tearing down that tower, there's no taking that back.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way to bring those men back to life. I mean, and he would have had to fall in before Israel and be like, "I made a mistake, guys. I should have never done that." in a million years. I should never even consider doing that. But instead, the people have to look at him like, man, if we cross Gideon, he's gonna hurt us. He's gonna make us pay. So, and that's a pride thing too. It's like, you do that to me? How dare you? Do you know who I am? I'm Gideon. I'm Gideon. I'm God's chosen. And like, I don't know. I think his attitude is really shifting in here. So, and now let's go back to this. Then he asked Zebah and Zalmunna, "What kind of men did you kill in Tabor?" "Men like you," they answered, "each one with the bearing of a prince." Gideon replied, "Those were my brothers, the sons of my own mother. As surely as the Lord lives, if you had spared their lives, I would not kill you." Turning to Jethar, his oldest son, he said, "Kill them." But Jethar did not draw his sword because he was only a boy and was afraid. And so here, Gideon is putting himself on the same level as royalty now, because in those times, if you killed the king's family, your punishment was death. You ain't getting no mercy. Typically in war, murder was excusable. I know it sounds bad, but what was done on the battlefield was done on the battlefield. You never held a grudge outside the battlefield, especially in future negotiations. But if you killed the king's family, there was like a right to still hold that grudge. And Gideon is acting like he's a king now, like he's royalty and taken there. And he turns to his young boy, and his boy takes after his father. They say the sins of the father pass on to the son. When you act a certain way, your children can inherit that. If you are an angry man, your children can inherit your anger. It doesn't mean they will. Mm-hmm. When it says the sins of the father are passed down to the son, I really believe, if you're abusive to your kids, when they grow up, they can turn abusive. Not every time. If you're an alcoholic, they can become an alcoholic. But Gideon was afraid, and he was a coward, and his son, Jether, did not draw his sword because he was only a boy and was afraid. Now he's putting this huge pressure on Jether, which is a boy. I mean, he was an adult when God called him out. Now he's looking at his boy trying to put the same pressure on him. And then Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Come, do it yourself. As is the man, so is his strength." So Gideon stepped forward and killed them, and took the ornaments off their camels' neck. So Gideon, I bet that burned him 7 ways sideways. We were like, dude, who are you? You gonna have the boy do it? You're big dog. You're the king. Come kill us yourself. And he came forward and killed them. He took the ornaments off their camels. And these were a pagan people, and these ornaments were for the king, and they represented their gods and everything like that. Anything to add to that? All right. We're going to get into Gideon's ephod. An ephod was a piece of clothing that the priests wore when they went into the temple. It had 12 beautiful stones on it that represented the 12 tribes of Israel. So the Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us from the hand of Midian." But Gideon told them, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." And he said, "I do have one request. For each of you to give me the earring from your share of the plunder." It was the custom of the Ishmaelites to wear gold earrings. They answered, "We will be glad to give you them." So they spread out a garment, and each of them threw in the ring from his plunder onto it. The weight of the gold rings he asked for came to 1,700 shekels, not counting the ornaments, the pendants, and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, or the chains that were on their camels' necks. Gideon made the gold into an ephod, which he placed in Ophrah, his town. All Israelites prostituted themselves by worshiping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. So there's a lot going on here too. Is the Israelites are like, "Dude, come rule over us. You're the king. You're it. Let's do it. You've shown your hand." And Gideon's like, "No. Let God rule over you. God's gonna do it. He rules over you." The reason he didn't want to be a king, because there was a lot of rules that came behind it, and he would have had to follow the rules and had a lot of responsibilities. He's basically like a pseudo king. He definitely wanted the status of a king. He wanted to be treated like royalty, but he definitely didn't want the responsibilities of it. And here's another thing: is at the time, all the people would go to like Judah, it was still I can't remember what it was called at this time, but in Israel they had worship at a very specific place where the Ark of the Covenant was, and he created this ephod out of pagan items. He made it gold, and he put it there so the people wouldn't have to go over there and worship, because he was afraid their hearts would go over with like the Ephraimites. He was afraid that they would be over there, and he wanted that prestige, he wanted that power, and so he created this thing for them. You guys don't got to go over there and worship where the Ark of the Covenant is. You can worship right here. And I have this beautiful golden ephod taken of the finest purple clothing, of these gold chains, of this, that. He just creates this thing, and it becomes a snare. because now people aren't even worshiping God anymore. They're like, this whole incident was so God could show them, I'm still here. I need you guys to come to me. And the minute, so they had 40 years of oppression, I think it was here. Maybe. I'm pretty sure it was like 40 years. Okay, maybe not. For 7 years. Still a big, long time. For 7 years, they're in the hands of the Midianites. And they're like, we just need freedom. We need freedom, God. You know, and God says, hey, this is happening to you because you didn't follow what I had for you. You prostituted yourself. You didn't come to me. And now you're dealing with this. The minute they're free, the leader who God put there and freed and gave all these special signs to, instantly started killing people, instantly didn't forgive people when they had the same fears and doubts he did, and then went right back, literally as soon as everything was over, went right back to like prostituting themselves and forgetting about God, basically. And the way he used God to, the Lord will rule over you. You know, the Lord will. Not me, the Lord. However, you know, you come to me, you come at this where I have this ephod, we'll all get the Lord's word together, you know, and we'll do that. So, and this is pretty much the last couple paragraphs in the book, so we'll get through this. Thus Midian was subdued before the Israelites, and did not raise its head again during Gideon's lifetime. The land had peace 40 years. Jeroboam, son of Joash, went back home to live. He had 70 sons of his own, for he had many wives. His concubine, who lived in Shechem, also bore him a son, whose name was Abimelech. Gideon, son of Joash, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abzerites. So, for 40 years, God still gave him peace. Even though they instantly went back to their nonsense, God still gave him 40 years of peace. He's like, you know what? That's another thing that shows God's mercy in these type of situations. And I do like that after this, where he said he had peace for 40 years, he's referred to as Jerubbabel, son of Joash. You know, his pagan name is being used. And that's kind of who Gideon morphed into. He morphed into Jerubbabel. You know, let Baal contend with him. And another thing with the king, you know, he used that status, and he's amassing wives, which is something kings weren't supposed to do in the Israelite faith. So he didn't want the king title because he couldn't have got away with this at the same time. And he's having all these wives. He has a concubine who lived in Shechem, which is another pagan area. She bore him the same Abimelech, and this shows Gideon's pride too, because Abimelech, the meaning of that name is son of the king. So you can see how Gideon saw himself. He was like, nah, I can't be your king. I can't rule over you. He sure saw himself as a king. He took advantage of it and got gold, created something to worship, had all these women, amassed power, had 70 kids. And this kind of goes back to like the attitude you pass on to your kids. You know, you could be in the poorest of circumstance or have money, but when you're passing on that bad attitude, you know, I mean, imagine your father is someone who doesn't show mercy, who, you know, you can't say he loves my mother because he has 70 wives, and, you know, you can't have that stability back then when you have that many women. That was David's downfall. David had so many different baby mamas that it caused grief in his family. It caused, like, everyone was attacking each other. Imagine this pseudo-king dies, and he has 70 kids. 70 kids, which one's going to be anointed king? And there's going to be a long succession of people who would have that spot. But anyway, no sooner had Gideon died than the Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals. They set up Baal Berith as their god, and did not remember the Lord their God, who had rescued them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. They also failed to show any loyalty to the family of Jerubbabel, that is Gideon, in spite of all the good things he had done for them. So that's kind of the end of the chapter there, and it ends on that note, where it's like, the minute he's gone, no sooner did God save them, did Gideon set up a snare. No sooner did Gideon die, did they go right back to worshiping Baal, which is Satan. And they didn't show any loyalty to the family of Jerubbabel, in spite of all the good things they did. Just like Gideon did not show any loyalty to God, despite all the good things he had done for him. So their leader for 40 years had the same attitude, and when he died, that attitude prevailed. It showed itself to the people. And I'm not making this whole video series a dog on Gideon, because obviously Gideon was chosen by God. You know, obviously he had the potential to do many things, but with the Bible, especially the Old Testament, there's a lot of lessons to learn in there, and there's a lot of attitudes we don't have to take on, like we should recognize and not take on. I was reading something on a computer when I first did the study. So I got to kind of make this last part because for some reason the last part of my video didn't even record. It showed it recording, but it didn't record. So I'm adding on this part. That video wasn't made to like dog on Gideon. It was actually just to give an example of what not to do, or just like kind of look at the characters of the Bible more realistically. I think sometimes as Christians we try to justify the heroes of the Bible, and everything they do we try to justify as it was the right thing no matter what, even though how crazy it comes out. Um, I don't think that's the point. You know, when I looked at Gideon talking to the people, the Ephraimites, and he was being very like sarcastic, and like, "Oh, you guys are so much greater than me." I only come to that realization because I've been that person before, and you know, instantly when I read that, I recognized myself in that. So you know, that was kind of where we're getting there. With our character comparison, I'm going to go ahead and open this up and read it real quick, and we can kind of find out where it was at. Um, so Gideon is the plucky deliverer of Israel from the Maraudi and Midianites, which is true. He was. He did deliver them. Gideon and his hand-picked crew of 300 commandos threw the Midianites into panic by a sudden night attack. That's also true. The Ephraimites belatedly joined Gideon in mopping up the Midianite remnants of the next day, which they only joined late because Gideon didn't send out word to them. He sent out word to everyone else but them, and that was probably because he didn't want to deal with them, or he wanted to like throw a blow to them, like, yeah, we don't need the big dogs for this, you know. That was his own choice. They peevishly complained that they should have been allowed a more prominent role in the operation. It might have helped. Gideon proved his diplomatic skills by soothing the Ephraimites with a flattering speech. Kinda, I think that he was being sarcastic, but that's kind of my interpretation of it. Like I said, just because I recognize it in me and the things I've said before. He also punished the villagers of Peniel and Succoth, who had sneered and refused food to Gideon's men. Established as the strong man of the region, Gideon ruled as a judge over the tribes of their clans for 40 years until his death. He is also known by the names of Jerubbaal and Jerubbasheth. Sheth. Yep. So that's the comparison. I think that this book is a good resource, but sometimes when I read the character comparisons, I feel like they put the characters in the best light possible, and I think that being to study the Old Testament is to recognize the flaws in the men God used, and just learning from those flaws, learning from those mistakes, and trying to apply that knowledge to our life. So with that whole thing, the last video got cut off. I was kind of explaining when I was doing my study for this originally. I was kind of studying up on it. I came across other people's opinions and the ways they interpreted it, and some people were saying like, well, the men of Succoth, they deserve to die. Like they disrespected Gideon, and that was God's righteous judgment, and that's how He judges us. And that when we get to that line, we disrespect Him, and it's just cut off. And I looked at that interpretation. I was like, that's crazy, because in the whole rest of the chapter, God was very patient with Gideon. He was very patient with Israel because instantly they started prostituting themselves to the ephod, and He still gave them 40 years of peace. So I think that the whole purpose of that is to show that when God gives us something and blesses us with something, we should take that same attitude forward. If God can forgive us of sins, we can forgive other people of sins. If God can forgive us, we can forgive ourselves. We can make mistakes, and even though Gideon made those big mistakes, God was still kind to his family. Just because you're making mistakes doesn't mean that God's just going to abandon you right then and there. He's with you. But the trick is to recognize those moments where we're failing, and we're not being good leaders, we're not being good husbands, not being good fathers, we're not being good people in general, and to be able to turn away from that and try to be more Christ-like in our conduct. So that was it. Sorry, I had to make this quick little patch video to get this fixed. Hope everyone's having a blessed day, and take it easy.